Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, July 24th, 2013, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Manny's in the control room, keeping watch on our transmissions out there. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Looking over at the corporate media today, we're still getting the tail end of the royal baby. They're starting to pull back on that one because apparently they belatedly realized that waving around the lifestyles of the rich and undeserving in constant media saturation was actually provoking a lot of anger among the British subjects and even the American citizens, who don't want to be reminded of how the ultra-rich in the world are just skimming through life and luxury and glory while all of us are trying to find jobs and build businesses and losing our homes and just victims of this out-of-control financial corruption that we're seeing. So they're already backing off on that one. And I understand from the propagandist's point of view, the idea was, let's have something pleasant for them to think about. Let's have a story about a baby. That'll take their minds off of NSA Gate and the rest. But that one backfired. Now, of course, we're on to Wiener's Wiener. And the fact has come out that apparently even after having to leave Congress because of sexting messages to women involving his intimate portions of his anatomy, he went on doing it. There have been more complaints, and they're already saying, you should not be running for office again. And he's saying, I'm going to run for office. They've got his wife standing up there saying, oh, I don't care if he's doing this kind of thing. And trying to, already before he's even running for office, he's trying to deal with this huge, huge scandal of just bad behavior. And it is a reminder that the curse of political power is it attracts the very sort of people who should never be allowed to have it. And that's just where, it's part of the conditization process. And for the new listeners who don't know what I mean by that, conditization is a word we came up with back in 2001, in the early part of the year, when the U.S. government was already telling other countries that they had a plan to invade Afghanistan in October of 2001 in order to secure a pipeline right-of-way for that oil company consortium that had gone to Congress in the 1990s and said, we need a new government in Afghanistan. That Taliban, they won't sell us the pipeline right away for the price we want to pay. It's going to be lower cost to simply invade and regime change, which is what happened. And Hamid Karzai, who was on that oil company consortium that went before Congress, of course, is now the newly installed El Presidente de UNOCAL of Afghanistan. So we know how these things are going on. So in early 2001, everybody in the world knew about the plan to invade Afghanistan except the people of the United States of America, because the American corporate media was spending all their time on Gary Condit and Chandra Levy. Were they having an affair? Did he offer? And it was just constant saturation. You know, they're talking about Gary Condit is crossing the street now. Is he staying within the lines of the crosswalk? I don't know. Let's go to the sky cam. And that's why we call it conditization, using tawdry sex scandals or anything else that is a distraction to keep the American people from focusing on the real story. We saw it again during the Whitewater investigation, where Ken Starr just threw all the focus on Monica Lewinsky and the stained blue dress, while stories of government-sanctioned drug running and corruption and links to the SNL meltdown of the 1980s basically went ignored, along with the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. So that's why we call it conditization, when the media is trying to keep you distracted with these side issues so you're not focusing on the things that really ought to be making you very, very angry. Now, before we get into the meat of the story, I want to go back and touch on a subject regarding hate crime hoaxes, because over the last couple of weeks, we have seen a renewal of the campaign to wag the Nazis at us all. They're bringing, cable TV channels, they're going back and replaying all the old movies about World War II and the Nazis and how bad they were. And we're seeing all this constant Nazis on Broadway, Nazis on the moon, Santa Claus versus the Nazis. I actually posited that as a joke, I think, last Christmas, that if they wanted to wag the Nazis at us one more time, they need to come up with the movie Santa Claus versus the Nazis. I understand somebody actually is doing that now. That's how desperate they are to keep us trapped back in the middle of the previous century and have our worldview filtered through all of that. So we started seeing all these stories about how there's a burning swastika out in San Bernardino, and apparently there's been anti-Semitic graffiti left on a synagogue in Baltimore. We saw the Simon Wiesenthal Center is mounting a poster campaign. We want to catch the last Nazi war criminals, on that assumption that there are any of them left, because the only ones they can find are already in their 80s and 90s, and most of them are dying before they even get their show trials. And every time we've seen this before, this sudden saturation reminder of the evils of Hitler and the Nazis, it's usually a signal Israel's getting ready to invade somebody, and they want to remind us all to feel sorry for them. As political cover, well, yes, they just went off and attacked without provocation into a neighboring country, but gee, they suffered so much in the last century, we should just turn a blind eye. And we're definitely seeing that. And, you know, hate crime hoaxes are a reality. And I posted a link from whatreallyhappened.com to a website that just lists all these hate crime hoaxes that are used for political advantage, to get people angry, to get them to stop thinking objectively and say, oh, that was a terrible thing that was happening, in order to sell an agenda. And hate crime hoaxes are absolutely real. It's a sort of a civilian benign form of the false flag attack. Back in 1987, we had the Tawana Brawley hate crime hoax where her body was covered with all this racist slogans, and she claimed she had been raped and left in a trash bag. That ruined entire careers of innocent people before that was exposed as a hoax. Back in 1991, up in Davis, California, there was this rape hoax where this woman claimed that she'd been gang raped by skateboarding teenagers on the median of the highway, and nobody stopped to help her. And the city council was on the verge of passing a quite unconstitutional male-only curfew when that hoax was exposed. Back in 2004, we had that professor at the Claremont College who was caught painting swastikas on her own car. 1989, Morton Downey Jr. claimed skinheads had painted a swastika on his forehead in an airport bathroom. That turned out to be a hoax to try and bolster his sagging ratings. Just last year, 2 lesbians got arrested in Colorado for spray painting hate slogans on their own garage and saying, oh, feel sorry for us, feel sorry for us. So it's a reality. And if you go and take a look at all those hate crimes for which the perpetrators are actually caught, the majority turn out to be hoaxes, from which we may thusly conclude that probably the majority of the uncaught perpetrators are in the middle of some kind of a hoax for political gains here. But it is a reality of life that when you see whether it's a false flag attack, like the attack on the USS Liberty, or the Lavon affair, or you see these phony hate crimes, they are all propaganda operations to get you to hate the people that you're supposed to be hating and feel sorry for the people you're supposed to be feeling sorry for, and it's all manipulation here. And I wanted to make an issue about this because I got into an online email debate with a gentleman in the corporate media who shall remain nameless. And I basically said, every time we see this, it signals Israel's going to start an attack, and I even offered to bet him coffee mugs that Israel was going to uncork on somebody within the next 2 weeks. And if I win, I get a coffee mug from his news organization, and if he wins, he gets a free What Really Happened coffee mug, but he didn't want to take the bet. So we'll see what's going to go on there. Anyway, moving right along here, there's another breaking story. We're going to get into it further in the show, but I feel it's worth a mention up here at the top. There's been another gas platform blowout down in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's getting a little bit of coverage, but not as much as it should. We all remember the disastrous Deepwater Horizon blowout and how deadly and toxic that was. And we need to go back and look at first causes. Why are these things happening, and why were not certain lessons learned from the Deepwater Horizon? And we will be talking about that a little bit further in the show. So anyway, we're coming up here on our first commercial break. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting past all the condensation and distraction in the corporate media, we're going to get back to Floodgate, which is our collective name for all the gates that are now biting at the ankles of this administration. And we're going to start with NSA Gate. The House of Representatives is holding a debate and is about to vote on the Amash-Conyers Amendment, which is going to constrain the National Security Agency from indiscriminate collection of phone records from law-abiding citizens. And they're going to try and say that under Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, that such searches and collection have to be confined to people who are the subject of an ongoing investigation. They're trying to bring this NSA spying back in compliance with the Fourth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Not that I would expect the NSA to actually comply with such a law, because they've been operating outside the Constitution and the rule of law all along, all the way back to Echelon in the 1980s. They were evading civil protections. Clearly see themselves as above the law. So they're looking at that, and I think members of Congress are very incensed by the realization that the NSA has been spying on them and spying on judges, spying on officials. Certainly, we had one of these whistleblowers who came forward on ABC saying the NSA is listening to the phone calls of our serving military in the war zone. And the really juicy sex talk with their spouses and partners back home gets traded around like free porn. Now, these are people in uniform who have put their lives on the line for whatever the agenda behind all the wars is. And the NSA views them as suspect as well. And again, it's all unconstitutional. I mean, technically the NSA could say that since our serving military are in foreign war zones, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to them. I would disagree. I would say that if somebody has put on the uniform of the United States military to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, that they are protected by that Constitution and the Bill of Rights wherever on the globe they may go. That you don't get to sever them from their civil protections just because you've put them on a military transport outside the borders of the United States of America. That's my point of view. I don't want to get into the issue of whether any one American citizen is any more or less deserving of the protection of the Bill of Rights. I think it should apply to everybody equally. But this idea that because they're serving in foreign lands that it's okay for the NSA to listen to them under the authorization of the Foreign Intelligence Service Act, I think it's abusive. I know a lot of military people I talk to are very, very angry about this. So the NSA is now scrambling. They're trying to lobby Congress not to pass any amendments that would limit their surveillance powers on law-abiding American citizens. By now, probably some of these members of Congress have gotten late-night phone calls, playing back excerpts of their own phone calls to Fifi's phone fantasies as a warning not to go along with this. But they're mounting a major, major effort. The NSA wants to go on being able to spy on ordinary Americans. And the problem with that, as we've said before, this government cannot be trusted with your private data. And we know that going all the way back to the Seattle Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, where U.S. intelligence agencies, paid with U.S. tax dollars, were stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to political cronies. That's got nothing to do with crime and terror. Now, the White House is out there screaming at Congress not to curb NSA data collection. And the White House is lobbying congressional leaders. Now, this is quite a contrast, because back in 2007, candidate Barack Obama got up and said that if he succeeded in winning the White House, he was going to rein in this out-of-control surveillance and make sure that no law-abiding citizen was spied on unless there was an actual accusation that they were committing some kind of a crime or act of terror. That's what Obama said back in 2007, and of course here we are in 2013, and Obama has become absolutely fanatic about secrecy, surveillance of the American people, trying to crack down on whistleblowers. They've even got their own federal government employees spying on each other and saying if you even suspect this person is a whistleblower, if you don't report it, you'll be arrested. What a climate of mistrust and fear that's going to sow within the administration itself. And that's going to actually hamstring this administration's ability to do anything efficiently here. But it's all about secrecy and spying and paranoia. I think Barack Obama just took away the gold medal in Oval Office paranoia from Richard Milhouse Nixon, which is not surprising since Obama is committing many of the same offenses that were articles of impeachment against Nixon, which he evaded by having the decency to resign. Meanwhile, despite all this talk about wanting to get the NSA under control and preserve the rights of ordinary American citizens, the federal government is now putting pressure on online firms to secure the master encryption keys. As you know, there's a lot of encryption used for secure HTTP websites. A lot of companies like Facebook are using encryption to secure the traffic going to and from their customers, and the federal government is now saying we need all those master encryption keys. And it is a reminder that the NSA is not a magic box where encrypted traffic goes in and clear text comes out. We already proved that with our first and second NSA challenges. That the NSA can't actually find real criminals and real terrorists who develop their own encryption. Because if they don't know the method, they can't break the code. We saw that in World War II with the German Enigma machine. They weren't able to break that code until they captured an actual machine and got the method. Now, as another embarrassment for how ineffective the NSA is despite all these billions and billions of dollars, in response to some of the civil lawsuits that are being mounted against the NSA, and the Department of Justice is already out there saying that American citizens actually don't have legal standing to sue the NSA for violating the Constitution, which is absurd. We are all protected by that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That is what gives us standing. But we're already seeing the Department of Justice saying, no, you're not allowed to do anything about this. You're not allowed to challenge the constitutionality here. In response to some of these civil lawsuits, requesting documentation on communications among NSA people regarding the extent and methods of the surveillance, the NSA is now saying, actually, we aren't able to run computer searches on our own emails. Really, we may be scanning every email of every American and people around the world, but just somehow we don't have the technical expertise to go in and search through all of our emails and find any relevant documents. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to sell you here. Now, the United States is continuing to embarrass itself, thrashing around about Edward Snowden. Oh, he's a traitor. He's got to be brought to... They're trying to put the focus on Snowden in order to take the focus off what Snowden told to the American people, which is that you are being spied on in violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. Russia has now reportedly given Snowden the proper documents where he can leave the transit area of the Moscow airport and go out into Russia proper, get an apartment, get a job. I'm sure there's plenty of computer companies and even Russian government ministries who are just lining up to offer him a job based on what he knows. And if you look at it in this context, the United States, with this heavy-handed approach of, forcing down the airplane of the Bolivian president because they thought Snowden was on there, they've actually made matters worse. Because if Snowden had been allowed to go off to some other country and just sort of mind his own business, the situation would be over and done with. But the harder the U.S. pushes, the more the world is aware of this heavy-handed, we rule the world mentality, and how many nations around the world are saying, actually, we don't go along with that anymore. And now Snowden looks like he's going to be staying in Russia to Russia's advantage. The White House policy on Snowden actually made the security losses even worse. Now, speaking of Russia, Putin is getting ready to visit Iran, ostensibly to revive nuclear talks, to try and get the P5+1 talks back on track. I would suspect that Russia is really getting ready to work with Iran to bolster its defenses against the planned U.S. invasion. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over at the Atlantic, they're carrying a story how Lindsey Graham wants war with Iran at the end of summer. And he's out there telling a cheering audience that we have got to go in and blah, 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 blah. Okay, Lindsey, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo, but we've got a bright orange jumpsuit left over from Abu Ghraib. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Iran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. Because after that whopper you all told us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, you will forgive us if we sit this next war out and keep our kids safe at home. Have you ever noticed the people out there screaming about war? They're not willing to go out there themselves. At least, back in the time of Napoleon, he led his own troops into battle. Alexander the Great led his own troops into battle. George Washington led his own troops into battle. And today we have a government that sits safely in their bunkers and sends other people's children out to get killed and crippled, to bring the blessings of private central banking and the petrodollar and Bretton Woods to the rest of the world here. Now, over in Syria, that is really finally starting to fall apart for the Western war hawks. because Assad, very prudently and wisely, has offered a complete amnesty to anybody who sided with the hired mercenary army. Remember, 95% of the Free Syria army are not from Syria. They're all from other places. They're all there for a paycheck. And now they're fighting amongst themselves. And so Assad issued an amnesty. If you'll come back and join us, all crimes are forgiven. And apparently, a lot of the so-called rebels are taking advantage of that. So this is probably one of the reasons why NATO is saying, yeah, Assad's going to pull out of this thing. And that's why we have people like McCain and Dempsey saying, we've got to invade now. We've got to invade now. We can't be seen to lose this war, or the war plans for Iran and the rest of it. They're all going to fall off the track, which is exactly what's happening. It's exactly what's happening. Now, getting back to this sudden flood of wag the Nazis that we've been seeing in the corporate media this last week, over at Press TV, we're seeing the story where Israel is threatening to attack Syria, quote, if provocations continue. Now, there's a weird phrase, provocations. You mean like flying into the other guy's country and dropping bombs all over the place, which Israel has been doing to Syria over the last couple of months? So it looks to me like Israel's getting ready to haul off and attack Syria, and they want to convince the world that somehow it was all Syria's fault. We didn't mean to bomb Syria, Mommy. They made us do it. And it's worth remembering that back in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, Israel was one of the loudest voices out there screaming, we know they have nuclear weapons. We can't show you the proof, of course. It will give away our methods and our sources, but we're absolutely convinced they have nuclear weapons, so you Americans should go kill them for us. And we now know, of course, that that was a gigantic lie. We called it the lie of the last century. Already has rivals this time. And inevitably, as we see this run-up to war, there have been more rockets fired from Gaza into Israel that hit absolutely nothing. They hit dirt. Nobody injured, no casualties, nobody killed, no property damage at all. Every time Israel's looking to start another war, they say, oh, we're victims, we're being attacked. Israel is now acknowledged to be the world's sixth most powerful nuclear nation. That little starvation colony they've got down there in Gaza is not a threat to them. It's agent provocateurs that send harmless little bottle rockets into Israel that hit dirt so that Israel can say, we're the victims, we're the victims, we're the victims. Now, a little fact here for all of you Americans who are struggling to put food on the table and pay your rent or pay your mortgage or keep your business operating. Last year, 2012, Israel's military exports totaled $7.5 billion in sales. Most of the exports went to Asian and Pacific companies. And this is up from 2011 when they sold $5.8 billion in military exports. So if Israel has such a healthy arms industry, why are Americans still forced to send them billions and billions of dollars every year in military aid, all of it illegal under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act, for defense? Obviously, if Israel really felt they were under threat from their neighboring nations, they wouldn't be selling the weapons they are making to other countries. And we have to ask the question, how much technology is reverse engineered out of the weapons given to Israel by the United States and become part of their growing arms export industry and are being sold to countries who may not be entirely friendly to the United States? Because Israel's never hesitated to take information from the United States and give it to our enemies. And, of course, I think back to Jonathan Pollard, where Netanyahu was once again back on his bandwagon. You must free Jonathan Pollard if we're going to talk peace with Palestine. And you need to understand, Jonathan Pollard stole major, important, classified information about America's nuclear deterrent and sold it to Israel. Israel turned around and traded it to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas. Some friend in the Middle East we have there. And so we have this track record of Israel acquiring by hook or by crook or by congressional mandate American military technology and handing it over to our enemies. And our Congress just looks the other way while this is going on because they're terrified of AIPAC. Now, getting back to the situation over there in Egypt as the military is consolidating its control and trying to form a new government and now calling on the people to please support them and stop rioting, stop fighting, and get into reconciliation, we are now hearing that what broke the camel's back over there, the last straw, was Morsi cutting diplomatic ties with Syria in order to placate U.S. and Israeli political pressure. And because the Egyptian military did not want to lose their children in a coming war against Syria, that was what angered the military to take the side of the people in getting Morsi out. And now, of course, we hear the new government of Egypt is reestablishing diplomatic ties with the government of Syria. So this is a major foreign policy blunder on the part of the United States. They lost control of this situation rather dramatically. Let's see, little scandal coming out of the war zone, one of many, many, many. Apparently, millions of dollars were being spent to supposedly protect American troops from improvised explosives on Afghanistan roads. And now it turns out that money wound up just being squandered and wasted by government contractors who did not actually come up with any ways to help protect our soldiers from these improvised explosive devices, which means kids lost their lives over this corruption. Remember, there was that huge scandal where somebody took this golf ball locator gizmo and relabeled it as an improvised explosive device detector. Completely, totally useless, made millions and millions of dollars selling these to the governments that were in these war zones before he was finally caught. It's amazing. The NSA is watching Americans for every little tiny single thing we might be doing wrong. Nobody's keeping watch on these corporations that are just reaping millions and millions, billions and billions of profits. It's starting to sound like Carl Sagan. Billions and billions of profits vanishing into the black holes of the military-industrial complex. Now, yesterday we pointed out how Barack Obama, having failed to kick up racial strife as a distraction from Floodgate, was now out there trying to reassure Americans that he is going to finally, after 5 going on 6 years, deal with the economic problems. And I'd like to make a comment here. The Oval Office, and indeed the Congress of the United States of America, are not on-the-job training. You're supposed to know what your plans are and what you're going to do before you even campaign. Of course, we know from the aforesaid video about Obama that what they tell you during the campaign and what they actually do are not even in the same time zone. So we shouldn't be surprised about that. But Obama's out there talking about an economic recovery, and yet the government policy is still very much against ordinary American workers and very much for the continuing Wall Street corruption and crimes. We're incentivizing corruption on Wall Street by constantly looting the people to bail out Wall Street when they get into messes with all these derivatives and all this. It's a giant open-air casino over there in New York. You know, yee-haw, we're making huge amounts of money. And they don't put anything back into society for all that money they're getting. It's just shuffling around ink and paper. It's a giant open-air casino. And, you know, if you set up a casino where when people win at the wheel, they get to keep the money. And when they lose, you pass the hat among the casino workers, the barmaids, the bellhop, the desk clerk, to cover the losses so the players can go back to the wheel. That would be a very popular casino. And that is exactly what we have set up on Wall Street. And that is, of course, the classic definition of fascism. Those who make money get to keep it. Those who lose money transfer the losses to ordinary people. And that's not my opinion. That was Benito Mussolini. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy right now, and we're talking about the ongoing bankruptcy mania in Detroit. Now, we know there are powerful financial forces that are trying to head this off because of the derivatives problem. Credit default swaps sold against Detroit's debt, for which the financial companies selling those swaps do not have the cash reserves to make good on. We're seeing a continuing fallout over this recent release of emails from the city's emergency manager and his former law firm. They hired an emergency manager to get Detroit out of bankruptcy, who was himself a bankruptcy attorney at a bankruptcy law firm. And now it looks like this law firm was colluding with this emergency manager to intentionally throw Detroit into bankruptcy so they could make money off of it. It's called disaster capitalism. It's like when Goldman Sachs was being paid by the state of California to help sell California bonds, and then told its own investors to buy swaps against those bonds in the hope that they would collapse, which ultimately they did. These derivatives have become a major, major problem in the economy. Not only is it chaotic and throwing the system out of stability, but it actually incentivizes causing companies and cities and states to collapse in order to cash in on those credit default swaps. One of the big problems you have with derivatives, like credit default swaps, they're unregulated. And you are allowed to buy credit default swaps on assets you do not own. That's like me being able to buy a fire insurance policy on my neighbor's house, which of course gives me a motive to sneak over there late at night with a can of gasoline and a road flare, to burn it down, to make profit off of that. Now, it's illegal to do that. The regular insurance company, you may only insure assets you own, your car, your house, your life. But with derivatives, you can buy effectively what amounts to a fire insurance policy on somebody else's company, somebody else's investment, somebody else's state, and cash in when it falls apart. When we talk about the potential regulation of the derivatives market, which of course Wall Street is fighting tooth and nail, that's one of the first issues that have to be addressed. You cannot buy derivatives on assets you don't own. That'll slow things down here. Now, a lot of people are looking at what happened in Detroit, and it is, if you go out on the web and you web search photos of Detroit, it used to be a magnificent city with great architectural wonders. It used to be the heart of the American automotive industry, and now it's practically a ghost town. And what is happening there in Detroit is already starting to happen in other major American cities. And everybody's talking about, oh, Detroit will be the launching point for an attack on pensions and retirement. Because, oh, those baby boomers, there are just too many of them. We can't deal with that. Well, in point of fact, you need to remember, back in the 1980s, Congress was aware that the baby boomers were going to be retiring. And they increased Social Security taxes to build up a huge cash fund in Social Security to cover those retirements. Then along came the Clinton administration. And they were saying, oh, look at all that money over there in the Social Security Trust Fund. We can just spend that as general revenues. We'll put some treasury bonds in there and that'll all be good. And that was where he got his magic federal budget surplus that the Democrats are still waving around every campaign. You know, Clinton had a federal budget surplus. Well, he was spending the retirement money of American workers. And now the government can't redeem those treasury bonds, and that's why they're talking about, well, we're going to raise the retirement age. Actually, retirement's a really bad idea. Remember we were talking last week, they're putting out this idea that really when you retire, that's when these mentally degenerative diseases start to happen. So you want to work up until the day that you die to keep your mind sharp. They're already selling this idea that your retirement is gone as a good thing. But when it comes to the pensions, whether it's in Detroit or other major American cities, the fault is not the baby boomers. The fault is not the unions that protect those firefighters, police, and teachers. The fault is Wall Street. Because back in 2008, in the heyday of the mortgage-backed security fraud, Wall Street's pet rating agencies gave those mortgage bundles AAA ratings. That made it legal for pension funds to invest in them, because pension funds are constrained. They can only invest in the most safe, secure possible investments. And Wall Street's ratings agencies were saying these mortgage bundles are gold, and pension funds all across America were investing in them. And then, of course, that fraud bubble burst, creating this flood of toxic assets, which are still being bought off the banks and dropped onto the American people. And that's why these pensions are in trouble. They were defunded by the losses into the mortgage-backed security fraud. That's where the blame for all of this goes. But they're out there trying to put the blame, oh, there's too many baby boomers. They really, if they're loyal patriot Americans, they should just, go off and die. They've had a nice, productive life. Retirement, that doesn't serve the economy. Actually, it does. A lot of retired people buy a lot of stuff. And we need to remember that what created this crisis in retirements was the defunding of pension funds by the mortgage-backed security fraud, and the fact that your Social Security funds were looted by the federal government to balance their books. And it's been done a little bit all along, but in the Clinton administration it was just completely out of control. And the money junkies are trying to blame the victims. It's all your fault. You weren't productive enough. You're not working hard enough. Well, we're all working very hard. The problem is that under the influence of the money junkies, the government and business are all about figuring out some way to take more money from the American people, and nobody's really thinking about how do we give the American people the means to earn the money to pay all these additional taxes and fees and Obamacare and the rest of it. The banks are always, happy to loan you money at interest, but nobody's looking at ways for the American people to earn money with which to pay all these bills, and that is why this nation hovers at the edge of collapse. And by the way, it's not confined to the United States. Spain is now looting their Social Security reserve fund to cover costs as they head into an economic mess. Have you noticed that every single nation with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is in the same exact financial mess? It's not a coincidence. Definitely not a coincidence. Getting back to Detroit, there is now talk about whether Snyder could actually go to jail for approving the Detroit bankruptcy filing, because supposedly bankruptcy of the city violates Michigan's state constitution. And again, this goes back to the issue that all of those financial firms that sold credit default swaps against Detroit's debt are going to be hammered hard if Detroit goes into bankruptcy. So they're going to be fighting this in court for years to come, which means nothing is going to actually be done to make life better for the people of Detroit. And again, we have a federal government that is supposed to sit as arbiter between the needs of the general population and business interests and reconcile the two for the good of the entire nation. And the government abandoned that. They're wholly, completely on the side of the money junkies. They're all money junkies themselves. That's why when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we should have a rule that all elected and appointed officials, not just the president, if we still have a president, have to put their wealth in a complete blind trust, fraud-proof, before they accept office. They do it for the president. We know that presidents evade that. We certainly know that Clinton did during the Whitewater hearings. It came out that only part of their wealth had been put into the blind trust, and they'd kept a bunch of stuff to play the markets with while they were in the Oval Office. That came out in the Whitewater testimony here. Now, of course, the people who are most being victimized by all of this right now are America's college students who got lured into going into college with promises of high-paying jobs when they came out. They were encouraged to take out student loans. And by the way, the interest on those loans is about to double, hitting them even harder. And it's wrecking the lives of these college graduates. They're coming out of college. They're not finding any jobs for which their degree has any merit. And they're taking the same low-paying jobs as other Americans, only they're also cursed with this student loan debt. We're going to take a break for news and station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about the economy and all the stuff that's going on there because, after all, that does affect your lives. Our rule around here, Rivero's rule of the news. If it affects your life, it's news. If it doesn't, it's distraction and fluff, and we're getting a lot of fluffiness going on right now. Detroit, in the middle of all of its problems, apparently decided they could take time to basically go out and fan the flames and say, there's got to be civil rights charges against George Zimmerman. They're still trying to play that up there to create the illusion of a racial divide in this country, to split us against each other. Same thing they did back in the 1960s. When white America and black America were united shoulder to shoulder against the Vietnam War, and the FBI went out with stunts like the Black Panther coloring book to get us sneering at each other and hating and distrusting each other and not watching very carefully what the government was doing. A little piece of trivia talking about student loans. Apparently, student loan debts cannot be discharged in bankruptcy because it's a U.S. government program. But apparently they're trying to build the case that city pension obligations to its retired workers can be. Now, normally up to this point, when companies and cities go bankrupt, the pensioners, the employees, are put at the top of the list for recovery. But the money junkies don't like that. And they're trying to use Detroit to build a case that in order to pay off all their debts, Detroit has to basically stiff its own workers on their retirements. Because they're old, they're useless, we can't make any more money off of them. Over in Washington, D.C., the quarrel continues to go on between Walmart and the Washington, D.C. City Council, which has mandated a new living wage that's above the federally mandated minimum wage because it's simply too expensive to live in Washington, D.C., or pretty much anywhere else on the minimum wage. We had last week McDonald's Let 'em Eat Cake moment, where they came out with a helpful budget for their employees to live on the money they make from McDonald's, which only works if they have a second job. So we're getting into some absurd situations. So the Washington, D.C. Council is telling Walmart the living wage mandate is not negotiable. Walmart's screaming they'll shut down all their stores and go someplace else, which might not be a bad idea, because these giant Walmart stores, which are filled with all these imported goods from places like China, and I'm not bashing Chinese manufacturing because China can make some good quality products like the iPhone. But companies like Walmart literally go out to these Chinese manufacturers and say, build the cheapest piece of crud you can so we can maximize our profits. And these giant Walmart stores crush down local manufacturing and local merchants. And so if Walmart was to pull out of Washington, D.C., you might see a sudden surge of local retailers opening their doors, buying and reselling products from local providers. Could actually be a good thing. I think it would be great to have a test case. Let's let Walmart pull out of Washington, D.C. and see what happens to the local economy. By the way, remember that whole mortgage assistance program? When the mortgage-backed security fraud exploded and homeowners were losing their homes left and right, the government, rather than curtail the fraudulent practices of the foreclosing banks, remember, they headed off all the state's attorneys generals and said, don't investigate, don't prosecute, we'll make it all better. We're Washington, D.C. And they had this mortgage assistance program, which was very often abused to force homeowners into foreclosure and take their homes. Because these banks aren't going to stay solvent on that little monthly payment you make every month. They needed the entire value of the home on their balance sheet right then and there to stay in the black. That's where all that foreclosure abuse came from. Well, so they had this program where there were going to be a mortgage assistance, mortgage modification programs, where they took some homeowners and said, all right, we're going to renegotiate your mortgage. And it turns out that here we are, where now 46% of homeowners who were allowed to take advantage of mortgage modification are still unable to pay their new reduced mortgages, and they're on the verge of losing their homes anyway. It's another classic case of a government program that was put out there to make it look like the government is concerned with ordinary Americans, and turns out not to be really working very well at all. We have another story. This is out of OpposingViews.com, where once again there's been a wrongful foreclosure. The First National Bank in Wellston, Ohio, accidentally foreclosed on the home of a woman named Katie Barnett, who had no idea any of this was going on until she came home from a 2-week trip and found the house had been emptied of all its possessions and the locks were changed. And the First National Bank in Wellston, Ohio said, oh, yeah, we just accidentally put the wrong address on the paperwork here. Now, Barnett is saying that it's going to cost about $18,000 to replace all the belongings that were taken out of their obviously personal possessions, can't be replaced. But the bank is saying, no, we don't have to pay. You know, the mistake was made by the people that we contracted the foreclosure to, and we're not responsible. You know, and they're going to let her have her house back. They're going to put the old locks back in, but oh no, we're not responsible for all your furniture and TV and everything. So this is really kind of the attitude that we see coming out of the money junkies. Even when they make mistakes, they get to keep the money. Now, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, the same SEC that sat on its butt for 12 years while Bernie Madoff screwed his investors for $65 billion, they are actually bringing a civil fraud case against Fabrice Touré, or Touré. And the star witness has now come out and said that Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated intentionally constructed a doomed investment that could not work so that the Paulson and Company hedge fund could make money on buying credit default swaps against it. We have another case where the derivatives are used to incentivize the collapse of businesses and investments. Yes, you got stuck with a bad investment, but I made tons of money because I bought credit default swaps against it. We have got to get these derivatives under control. They're tearing this nation's economy apart. These are true weapons of mass destruction against the American nation in the control of people who are suffering a serious psychological illness called money addiction. Now, we understand when you see heroin addicts or meth addicts or cocaine addicts and how they are destructive to their communities and their families, and we understand these are sick people, and there should be interventions to cure their behavior because it's damaging to society. But for some reason, there's a blind spot when we see money addicts who are intentionally going out and destroying other businesses and destroying homes in order to make a fast buck. We don't seem to be willing to recognize it as serious psychological behavior. And yet we know in that documentary Inside Job, they talk about how psychologists wired up the brains of these Wall Street executives and found out that every time they did a financial score, the part of the brain that lit up, the pleasure center, was exactly the same part of the brain that lights up when they do cocaine. And by the way, cocaine use on Wall Street is epidemic. Now, we're not talking about people who get rich by producing a good product, like somebody who invents a new product, you know, Steve Jobs with the Apple II, or James Cameron who makes really cool movies. Those are not the problem. That's capitalism at its best. I create something that people voluntarily buy from me and I get rich thereby. That's capitalism, and that we should applaud. I'm talking about people who game the system, who play the paper to become insanely rich at the expense of everybody around them and return nothing of real value to society in exchange for that. That's money junkyism. Bernie Madoff is a classic case. Already, co-founded NASDAQ, had more money than any one human could spend in a lifetime, and still felt that compulsion to go out and cheat investors for another $65 billion in his Ponzi scheme. That's psychologically ill behavior. And we need to recognize it as a sickness, and it's time for an intervention. Because Wall Street has been turned from its original purpose of allowing American workers to invest in the productivity of the nation into this giant open-air casino. And that is very destructive of the nation, and it's got to stop. It's time for an intervention. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Janet in Florida. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. Talking about jobs and Walmart. I don't know if you're aware of a conglomeration of factories here in this country founded 2012 by a couple of young people, and it's called Makers Row. Mm-hmm. And it's a conglomeration of designers, factories throughout the country to make the manufacturing process simpler using American products and providing jobs for American people. Everything American.
Well, and I admire that and I applaud that. I mean, we had a campaign back here in Hawaii some years back called Buy Hawaii that my wife and I produced some radio commercials for. And we should be encouraging local manufacturing, local agriculture in order to keep the system flexible and resilient. The problem is we see all these corporations saying, oh, the cost of labor is so much cheaper in other countries. The cost of doing business is cheaper in these other countries. That's because these other countries don't have the extremely high taxation rates the U.S. government does. It is taxation that is strangling this economy by making the cost of labor very, very high. They want to put the blame on healthcare costs and pensions and all the rest of it. But we have some of the highest taxes in the world, and at the same time, the fewest benefits from those taxes. If you go to countries like France, where they have high taxes, you get free education and free medical care for it. Here in the United States of America, we're paying the same high taxes to prop up the war machine and Wall Street, and then we have to go out and borrow money for our health care, or we have to borrow money to go to school. And so we're definitely between the rock and the hard place. And if you go to these other countries where they have this manufacturing at low cost, the reason it's at lower cost is the government isn't taking a huge piece of the action from it. And so I encourage anybody in the United States, and I approve of anybody in the United States trying to set up a business to manufacture products, You know, the cost of regulation, much of it is completely gratuitous. The amount of paperwork and reporting you have to do is just strangling it. And there's another aspect we need to keep in mind. The tech boom that we saw in the United States in the 70s and 80s and 90s was a fallout from the manned space program, going to the moon. The importance of that program wasn't planting the flag on the moon. It was the technological spin-offs that gave America the advantage in creating new industries and new products. And with the decline of our space exploration, that windfall, that technology incubator has gone away. And without that technological advantage and cursed with that excessive taxation and regulation is why businesses are motivated to leave the country.
Well, I agree with everything you said, but this is a great idea. They have factories now in most of the states, and their first target is the apparel and accessory industry. And they're open to, and you can email them with your idea. And I suggest, you know, to any of those out there listening, Makers Row, look it up on the Internet. They've got lots of information. Okay. Great idea.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great idea. We've got to start taking charge of our own economy right now and
Absolutely.
do what we know works best for the American people instead of just following along what the corporate media says is going to help Wall Street and the war machine go on doing what they're doing. And
we American people need to bypass this government.
Absolutely.
They have to bypass the government, and they come up with their own ideas and start doing.
I agree. I absolutely agree. So it's called Makers Row?
Makers Row, yes.
All right, I will hunt them down. And
I wish you could get one of the co-founders on to speak about it in the future.
I'll try. I need more guests on this show. I'm going to be making an effort to get more guests in the coming weeks, and I'll try and get somebody from Makers Row to come on the show, okay?
This is a positive thing.
Yes, I agree. It's the direction we need to go. We need to decentralize. We need to become independent of these large centralized banking corporations and large giant conglomerates that are flooding our economy with products of dubious safety and efficacy. You know, we're seeing the FDA once again is out there trying to scare people away from alternative natural medication. At the same time, they're saying there's absolutely no scientific evidence that any of these drugs being sold by the pharmacies are dangerous, and yet at the tail end of all their commercials on TV, there's always that warning, taking this drug could lead to your unexpected death. And it's just amazing that anybody can watch these TV commercials about pharmaceuticals, hear all those dire warnings about the consequences, and still run off to their doctors and say, oh, I saw this on TV. Give me a note so I can buy it from my pharmacist. And it's a very, very sick system here. And I think it's a great thing. So Makers Row, I'm going to hunt them down on the next commercial break. Janet, we're going to let you go here. I've got another caller on the line I want to get to. That's Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got three things for you, Mike. How'd you like the picture first?
I'm sorry. The pictures?
Yeah, the picture I sent of Montana.
Oh, I loved it here, and I sent a reply back on that one.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, two, have you heard anything else about that oil rig explosion down in the Gulf yet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's apparently on fire right now. It's been another blowout. We're going to be talking about that. Well, we'll talk about it now.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, wait, before you get into that, do me a favor.
Yes.
You can talk about that off the air there, but I want to ask you, tell you something else. I just got back from the doctor's at Kalispell there, and my doctor was irate. A friend of mine over in Troy had sent me an article there on this health stuff like that, and there was a sublink on it to Pfizer, to this drug, Lyrica. Yes. And they've been giving me that for my neuropathy in my legs there. And here again is another one of these drugs loaded with this sodium lauryl sulfate. And I brought that up there with a 3-page printout about sodium lauryl sulfate and how the liver doesn't, absorb it.
It doesn't process it.
Yeah, and then I told her again about those emails with the FDA that they refused to release any information on that sodium lauryl sulfate about what the maximum dosage was. Because if you got 4 different drugs that all have this sodium lauryl sulfate, I think it was like 0.05 you're allowed to have in your system or something like that, you know. They are poisoning people to death.
No. They're poisoning people into profitability. I mean, there's no medical reason for sodium lauryl sulfate to be put into medications that you are ingesting. I mean, it's a chemical that they use in shampoo to make it goopier and syrupy, but there's no medical benefit, and there are known toxic issues with it, and yet you find it in all these medications. and nobody seems to want to know why.
Oil wax strippers, engine degreasers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and then every one of them says, even toothpaste. If swallowed, call the nearest poison control center.
It is, but
I'll let you back to the oil rig thing, and then I'll drop you here on the phone here. But thanks, and thanks for the email back this morning. Okay.
All right, you're welcome there.
Right.
Sodium lauryl sulfate. There's a lot of stuff in medications that doesn't seem to be there to make the medication work all that well. And there are toxic issues, but you need to understand that the collective mindset of this medical industrial complex is that if the American people are healthy or are able to treat minor illnesses with natural cures, things they're growing in their garden, then you can't make money off of them. You're never going to have a healthy society when disease is a profit opportunity. This giant multi-billion-dollar medical industry, pharmaceutical industry, is profitable only so long as the American people are chronically ill. And I'm not saying somebody sat down and said, let's make people intentionally ill so we can make more money off of them. It's probably entirely subconscious, but that's why you have, let's put some sodium lauryl sulfate in there. Isn't it toxic? It doesn't matter, we'll sell them another pill. That's really what we've come down to. All right, we got to take a break for more commercials. I'll be back. I'm going to talk about the oil well disaster a little bit. Then we're going to get back onto some of our economic and other news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And responding to Keith here, I guess this is a good time to talk about this blowout on another platform, natural gas platform, off the coast of Louisiana. And for those who don't understand what the word really means, when they talk about a blowout, you've got this very, very long pipe going from the platform down to the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, and from there down into the reservoir they are attempting to harvest. And that huge, long pipe is filled with a mass of either oil or gas or a mixture of both. And the rate of flow has to be controlled very carefully because that volume of gas or oil in that pipe has a huge mass. And if it is allowed to start moving too fast, it can, when it hits a blockage, create pressures that are too great for the oil equipment to deal with, and it will fracture. And that's what a blowout is. Now, back on the Deepwater Horizon, where they were harvesting oil, the problem with the oil is if a large gas bubble gets in the pipe, which is a lot lighter than the oil, then the oil underneath the bubble starts accelerating. And when that column of oil slams into the rig, things let loose, and that's what caused the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Now, in order to try and deal with those problems, there is a device called a blowout preventer, which is usually installed at the point where the pipe hits the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, and it's basically just a giant valve. The problem with the Deepwater Horizon is that that blowout preventer was 4 years overdue for its regularly scheduled maintenance. This is a very heavy piece of equipment. It's down there at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. It's dealing with all the salt water and corrosion. It's not just like something you put on a shelf and you come back to it a few years later and it's still going to be in working order. It has to be maintained. And this one was allowed to basically sit there and go without maintenance for 4 years because it's a lot of work to basically shut off the pipe, bring this thing up, do its maintenance, put it back down, and reinstall it. And oil companies don't want to spend the money. There's another device called an acoustic blowout preventer. And this is an automated system that literally has electronics that listen to that pipe. And when it hears a giant gas bubble coming up, it shuts off automatically. Virtually every oil exporting nation on Earth that are drilling in the ocean mandate the use of acoustic blowout preventers. But they are not required in the United States of America because they cost about $500,000 each, and oil companies don't want to spend that money because it's going to cut into their bonuses. And that was what led to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Despite that, acoustic blowout preventers are still not required on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. And so now we have another gas platform where apparently there was a runaway flow of natural gas that blew out the top of this platform. They had to evacuate the people off the platform. The gas is just pouring into the sky. There's an oil slick around it, and now it is on fire. And when we look at these disasters, whether it's Deepwater Horizon or this new one or Fukushima or Challenger or Columbia or anything else, it always comes back to some money junkie pulling back on safety systems to save a few bucks and let somebody else clean up the mess. If you're dealing with a technology that is capable of causing large harm, like the San Onofre nuclear plant out in Southern California, safety decisions should not be in the hands of people with financial motives to cut back on these safety issues. We saw that again in San Onofre. They did they enlarged the heat exchangers in order to get more steam and more power out of their reactors. They actually lied to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and said it was just maintenance. And they put in these larger heat exchangers, and somebody somewhere reduced the specifications on those heat exchanger tubes in order to save a few bucks, and they started corroding and failing early. And now they've had to basically shut the whole system down. And this is what happens. You should not let the money junkies be making the safety decisions on these large, dangerous facilities. And we're seeing, yet again, another disaster where the safety systems that could have prevented it simply were not there. All righty, let's move right along here. Investment Watch blog is out there saying the great edifice of the recovery is crumbling. And it's a valid comment. We have been told ever since 2008, oh, the economy's in a recovery, the economy's in a recovery. The only place where the economy is recovering is Wall Street and the stock market, and we know that is mostly through manipulation and fraud, rigging the LIBOR, rigging the gold prices, rigging the unemployment numbers. It's all about illusion and perception. They can't actually fix the problem. And so the effort is totally on convincing you, the American people, that everything is okay. Just stay calm. Don't riot, unless it's over about Trayvon Martin, because then we can deal with that and use it as a distraction. It's all about perception. We saw this story just come through here a little while ago where the White House is seeking clarity on the issue of Edward Snowden, because this idea of screaming that he's a traitor is backflashing on the White House. Because we all know that treason is giving aid to the enemy in time of war. Well, Snowden blew the whistle on the illegal, unconstitutional NSA spying to the American people. And so every time Washington, D.C. screams that he's guilty of treason, they're basically advertising that Washington, D.C. already sees itself in a state of war against their primary enemy, the American people. So now they're going to back off and try and rebrand and repackage and try and come out with another trial balloon to get you to think the way they do about what's going on in this country, and it's failing miserably. Over at PIMCO, Bill Gross is out there saying now that the Federal Reserve will not tighten their quantitative easing until at least 2016, so that when they do tighten and things start falling apart, it'll be after Obama's out of office and he gets to skate free on all of this stuff. And we see that mindset time and time again, where members of Congress and occupants of the White House, they don't want to fix the problems permanently because it's too painful. We're just going to paper it over and sort of push it on a little further and hope it falls apart in the next administration to preserve their historical legacy. And we're basically here at 100 years of accumulating debt from this Ponzi scheme central bank, and every administration, every Congress solution is, let's just figure out a way to shove the problem forward a little bit more. And we know that can't work in the long run. Even John Maynard Keynes himself acknowledged that this pyramid scheme central bank had to fail eventually, but we'll all be dead by then, so who really cares? That was literally their attitude here. All right, we're going to grab another phone call here. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, man. You mentioned something about money junkies or something, didn't you?
Yes. I mentioned that topic quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, just coincidentally, of course, I'm sure that was not motivated by the fact that this is, the charter renewal year for the Federal Reserve.
No, I wish it were so, but it isn't. When the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, they were granted a 100-year charter, but in the 1930s, Congress amended the Federal Reserve Act to make the charter open-ended, so there is no expiration. Now, Congress can, anytime they want, rescind that charter. They could vote it through and shut it down immediately, and all it would cost the American people is to return to the owners of the Federal Reserve the original $1 billion that was pumped into the system as part of that deal. These days, $1 billion isn't a lot of money. It is a great idea. But you need to remember the financial interests in this country are huge campaign donors to the White House and members of Congress. And so you're never going to see a member of Congress who's going to challenge them. Ron Paul wanted to. And that was why we saw this concerted effort by the media and massive election fraud to make sure he got nowhere near the nomination in 2008 and 2012.
Oh, boy.
You know, the United States government is the finest government money can buy, and unfortunately the money junkies have got most of the money.
And you know what? What really rubs me is when I read about this Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who was the comptroller of the Pentagon, and it surfaced that he could not account for close to $3 trillion.
Yeah, and did you notice how they announced that one day before 9/11? So what should have been the financial military scandal of the year vanished the next day in the dust of the World Trade Towers.
Unbelievable. Did it come out, Mike? Reportedly, accounting records relative to that were in the Pentagon and were destroyed by that 757.
That's exactly right. That's why that 757 flew that long circle to come into the Pentagon from that side. It hit the offices where auditors were trying to find where all that money went. End of story. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Fred. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And checking my mailbox, I'm getting a lot of information being sent to me. Somebody just sent me this article from just after the Deepwater Horizon disaster, in which a survey of the Gulf oil platforms concluded that some 4,600 of them were at risk for developing leaks, which is due to a lack of maintenance and upkeep to save costs to make the money junkies happy. And the current blowout there in off the coast of Louisiana appears to be just more of the same. Somebody else sent me an article. Apparently this is a column by Robert Kohler over at the Tribune Media Services, where he's, again, this is an attempt to just fan up gratuitous racial tension. And Kohler's whole article is, that the black people of America ought to remember, what their slave labor would be worth in today's economy. And it's $1.4 trillion, and you blacks ought to stand up and demand compensation and reparations. They're just trying to get black and white America at each other's throats to save the government and Wall Street from their crimes and corruptions. And they're trying it because it worked back in the 1960s. But this is a new age. And we understand this is how the game gets played. Divide and conquer. Keep the American people angry with each other. Blacks against the white. Men against the women. Young against the old. Now, I agree, slavery was wrong. But you know something? All those slaves are dead. And all the people who owned those slaves are dead. And this idea of reparations is a slippery slope where you can go down and say, oh, the Native Americans are owed reparations for the entire existence of the country. And I'll tell you why it is a nonsense idea. One of my ancestors on my mother's side of the family ran a station on the Underground Railroad, helping escaped slaves through to Canada, because under laws in the North, while slavery itself was illegal, escaped slaves were to be given back to the slave hunters who were trying to track them down. And that was where the Underground Railroad, this bucket brigade of escaped slaves, from home to home to home up to Canada came about. And my ancestors ran one of these stations. It was 2 days away from the Canadian border. Now, what would happen if I went up to Canada and started pounding on the doors of the black people up there and saying, my ancestors helped your ancestors to freedom, and you owe me for that prior cost and benefit? I'd get laughed off the front porches, and rightly so. I had nothing to do with running the Underground Railroad. Had I been alive back then, I would have, but I wasn't alive then. And I can't take credit for that, certainly not in the financial sense. And this article by Kohler is part of this campaign to try and get racial discord going by a government that is absolutely desperate to take the focus off of NSA Gate, IRS Gate, Benghazi Gate, DOJ gate. By the way, somebody wrote in and said George Zimmerman has just now changed his name to Benghazi to guarantee that the corporate media will never mention it again. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls here. Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Thank you. Let's see. I look forward to the day where you can get off of Justin TV. I'll tell you one thing.
Yeah, I'm looking for a new provider. I get so many complaints about that, and I got to find a new streaming provider. I'm hoping that RBN will set up their own streaming server for all of the hosts to have a TV adjunct, but that's down the road. So please hit that donate button at RBN so we can buy our own video streaming server.
Okie dokie. Can I ask my question, and I'll listen offline? I had heard. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I had heard 9 months ago or something like that Iceland had reverted back to its old ways and all the good they did just it was totally negated, and that was that, and I just really didn't pay attention. Anyway, today I heard that everything that we've heard about Iceland was a lie. I don't know who to serve, who the lie would serve to tell a lie like that, and that they are in big trouble. And
okay, well, can I stop you right here?
Your thoughts on that, because I'm sorry?
Yeah, let me stop you right here and tell you what's going on. Well, ask yourself, where is the lie? Was the lie about Iceland's economic recovery after they threw the bankers in jail, or is the lie now saying that that never happened? And obviously, if they're lying now that Iceland really wasn't saved by their policies, there is a beneficiary of such a lie, and that's all these other nations with private central banks. Now remember, any time a country in history has broken free from the banking cartel, the other nations enslaved to the banking cartel will attack it. Remember what happened when the Weimar Republic collapsed in Germany, and the Nazis came in, and yes, they were bad people. I don't want to get into that discussion, but they did institute a government-issued value-based currency that turned Germany around. It was called the German Miracle. And as a result, the rest of the world's banking cartels tried to institute a boycott against Germany to destroy their economy, which set the stage for World War II. Same thing in the United States of America. We had a revolution to kick out the Bank of England, set up a government-issued value-based currency, and they tried to come back in, with the First Bank of the United States. And when Congress refused to renew the charter for the First Bank of the United States, the banking cartels set about with the War of 1812 to recolonize America and force them back into the slavery of the private central bank, the Bank of England. Same thing in Libya. Libya was doing fine. Gaddafi was everybody's friend. He was recognizing Israel's right to exist. Then all of a sudden he sets up a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and tells the world that if you want to buy Libya's oil, you will pay for it in the gold dinar. Next thing you know, they invade, kill Gaddafi, destroy the state central bank, put a private central bank in there, and Libya's oil back for sale only for the dollars. We've seen this pattern time and time again. When Iceland broke free of their banking cartel, when they threw their bankers in prison, when they wrote off all that debt, the corporate media basically ignored them. And the only time you found out what was going on with Iceland was here in the independent media. And they want Iceland to go away because too many people around the world are saying we should do what Iceland did. So I'm not surprised that we're now starting to see a propaganda campaign out there. Oh, Iceland didn't recover. When they put their bankers in prison, it didn't change anything, so don't you even dare think about putting bankers in prison. So when you start wondering where the lie is and who benefits, look for the lie that benefits the money junkies, and generally you're going to be bang spot on what's going on. Okay?
Right.
Okay?
Right. They sort of are our model and our answer. And this source, and I tried to look it up before you came on air, but this source said that the worst that happened was the biggest bankster, fraudster got 6 months in jail, and he's back out.
Well, you know, those bankers, they got a lot of pull. They just cut, what's his name from Enron? Skilling just got his sentence cut in half. The bankers look out for each other. They got a lot of political pull from that money. They do rule the world covertly, and we keep seeing it time and time again. And every once in a while, they'll send us all off to a world war because war is the bankers' richest harvest. We're going to let you go here, Steve, and switch over to Thomas in Sweden. Aloha, Thomas. Glad to hear you're doing better. What's on your mind today? Thomas.
You know, yeah, hi, Michael. Aloha. You know, I was isolated for a couple of weeks in the hospital thanks to Big Pharma. But anyway, whatever happened to the skyjacking thing of the Ecuadorian plane? I've been wondering about that.
Ecuadorian or the Bolivian? Which one are we talking about?
Whatever plane. You know, they forced it to land in Austria or someplace like that.
Yeah, that was Bolivia. That was the president of Bolivia was forced down because they thought Edward Snowden was on board. It is a violation of international law. It's even a violation of United States law that recognizes foreign heads of state as immune and sovereign, and you're not supposed to touch them. Huge, huge political blunder. If they'd found Snowden on board, they maybe could have evaded that and said, hey, we were justified, but Snowden wasn't on board, and it was a huge political disaster, huge diplomatic kerfuffle, as it were. Thomas, unfortunately, got to let you go here. We're at the top of the hour. We got to take some news and commercial break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? George?
How you doing, Mike?
There we are.
Yeah, you know, talking about those Nazis, you know, the thing is, Israel talked about those evil, evil Nazis. Well, I did a little searching around, and there was an Israeli citizen that sat there and documented about being sick and tired of the Nazi hoax, and that was that Israel gives more aid and comfort to real war criminals in the former Eastern Soviet bloc country, because after the Soviet coup, a lot of them fled to Israel hiding, knowing they might be arrested.
Well, you know, it's a documented fact that contrary to this image of constant Jew hate coming out of movies and TV about World War II, there were a lot of Jewish officers in the German war machine, and that's been documented, and their pictures are out there. But, you know, Israel has had a tremendous political and financial advantage promoting this story of World War II. And when I was a kid in the 1950s, and it was all recent memory, it worked very wonderfully well. But now we've got a generation of Americans and Germans who simply weren't even alive when all that stuff was happening. I wasn't even alive when it happened. I'm going to be 61 next month. I wasn't alive when all that stuff was going on. And after a while, you just get tired of hearing about it over and over and over again. And I think the majority of human beings want to start living in the 21st century and dealing with war crimes and atrocities that we're seeing happen here and now, because we can't do anything about what happened in Germany in World War II. It's beyond our reach. What we can do, what we can do is look at the evils taking place right now before our very eyes and decide we're going to do something about that, and not allow people to get away with these horrible crimes against humanity because we're supposed to feel sorry for what happened to their great-great-grandparents.
Well, I was hearing in Netanyahu's cabinet and his government that they have war criminals from Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany that all fled when communism fell. And yet we hear about Israel going after this Ohio man they call Ivan the Terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't even connected. But they still tried to bring him back.
Well, you're talking about Demjanjuk. I mean, they charged him with being Ivan the Terrible. They convicted him, sentenced him to death, and then evidence surfaced that they'd got the wrong guy, so he was let go. And then they came back and said, okay, well, he did this other thing, because Israel needs to maintain their illusion of infallibility in identifying people as Nazi war criminals, because if it turns out somebody who got convicted and condemned to death for being a Nazi war criminal turned out to be innocent, which is what happened with Demjanjuk, then you have to go back and say, how many other innocent people were targeted and convicted and condemned to death purely for political advantage to the government of Israel? It's a legitimate question that should be asked. We know there's a huge problem with wrongful convictions in the United States of America. This whole FBI scandal involving hair analysis, they're now having to go back and look at over 2,000 convictions that may have been completely wrong, including some death penalty cases. And so, we have to ask, just because the media says thus and such is guilty, are they really guilty, or is this somebody's political agenda? The Tsarnaev brothers in Boston would be a good example.
Well, I just hope, like I say, to talk about the Holocaust. In Russia, it was far more than the Holocaust, but we don't hear nothing about that. It's just those evil Nazis they talk about.
No, we don't. The whole historical perception is supposed to be about the whole world was ganged up on the Jewish population, and that was not true. If you go back and you study like the actual Red Cross records from those German slave labor camps, and you will find out that Jews were actually a minority of the population in those camps. They were throwing gays in there. They were throwing mentally retarded people were going in there. They threw the gypsies in there. And then they all died from these massive typhus epidemics that broke out toward the end of the war when Germany's health infrastructure began to crumble. But the entire worldview given us by Hollywood movies and TV is we're only supposed to think about this one group of victims. So when their descendants, who now run the state of Israel, go out and bomb Syria or bomb Palestine or bomb Lebanon or they're probably getting ready to go into the Sinai, we're not supposed to criticize them because of all these events that supposedly happened before we were all born.
Wait, did you hear about that false flag attack of Israeli planes flying out of Turkey, hitting the Russian naval base?
I did not hear about that one. I understand that Israel did a bombing run against Syria, flying out of a Turkish base. That's according to Russia Today, but I'm not aware that there was a false flag against Russian ships, which would definitely escalate the situation.
Well, this is what Russia's reply was. We know it was Israel. I said, we'll come back, but it's not when and where you want it to be.
If you have a source URL, a site for that, would you please send it to me, because I would definitely like to look into that, because we know Israel has a long, long history of false flag attacks. They'll go and attack somebody and say, oh, they did it there. They love to trick other people into fighting their wars. We know there's the Lavon affair, one of the few times they got caught and publicly humiliated before the world, where Israeli agents were bombing British and American assets in Egypt and planting evidence to frame Egyptian Muslims. We know about the attack on the USS Liberty, where Israel tried to sink that ship and blame it on Egypt to trick the U.S. into war against Egypt. We know that the only people actually arrested at the World Trade Towers on 9/11 turned out to be Israelis and Mossad agents. And it goes on and on and on. Viktor Ostrovsky, who's a former Mossad agent, wrote a book called By Way of Deception, in which he laid out that Israel smuggled a radio transmitter into Libya to send messages in codes and frequencies they knew the U.S. could intercept, to try and make it look like Gaddafi was getting ready to launch massive terror attacks against the United States. That's what tricked Reagan into bombing Libya, and they targeted Gaddafi himself. He survived then. They got his 5-year-old daughter, I think they blew her to little bloody bits. And it was all just a dirty trick. And Israel lives by these false flag attacks. We had the British government released documents, I think about 5 years back, that Israeli agents actually staged the hijacking that led to the raid on Entebbe, that made Israel look good and the Palestinians look bad. And just Israel has this long history of doing things like this. I think Israel was behind the attack on the USS Cole.
Well, they're the only ones capable of it and the only ones standing to gain from it.
Yeah, and we have a U.S. government that's so totally under their control that, even when the embarrassment of the USS Liberty came out, the U.S. government was, oh, we can't afford to embarrass our friends in Israel. We'll just go along and say it was an accident, it was cloudy, it was misty, they couldn't see what they were doing, which is nonsense. If you look at the photos and movies taken on board the Liberty at the time of the attack, blue sky, perfect visibility. And we now have had some of the pilots who took part in that raid saying, yeah, we knew it was an American ship. We were told, we were ordered to attack this American ship by the Israeli military command. Remember, all wars are started through lies, fraud, and deception. The people of a nation don't want to go to war. It's dangerous, dirty, hard work. It pays very, very little, and you run the risk of losing important parts of your body. And so every world leader that wants to start a war has to lie and trick their people into it. And there's nothing new about that. If you go back and read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, it says right in there, all war is based on deception. Leaders lie their nations into war.
Well, if Netanyahu wants to go to war, I'd be happy to buy him a Kevlar helmet, uniform, and give him an AR-15, and he can go walk into Syria.
Well, we've got Lindsey Graham is out there saying we have to have war in Syria by the end of summer. Okay, Lindsey, here's your parachute. Here's your rifle. We'll call and tell him you're on your way. Right now, of course, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction was the big lie used to convince us we had to throw our sons and daughters onto the Iraqi bayonets, and that was a huge lie. And they're back trying the same thing again. Oh, we've got to go into Syria. They've got weapons of mass destruction. Fool me once, so forth and so on. And it should be angering and infuriating to the American people that these war propagandists actually think you're stupid enough to fall for the same lies over and over and over again. Okay? We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, George, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And boy, how time flies when you are having fun here. Probably been hearing about this shuffling of aluminum, where a bunch of Wall Street money junkies got into the aluminum commodities trade and then started to hold up deliveries to artificially create a shortage to drive prices up, so that anybody using aluminum cans had to pay a higher price for what they're doing. In other words, they're doing to the United States with aluminum what Enron did to the state of California with electricity, create an artificial shortage to drive prices up in order to screw ordinary people. It's getting to be a bad habit over there. Meanwhile, House Republicans, in response to the serious financial problems with the U.S. Postal Service, are now saying that ordinary Americans don't need mail delivered to their homes anymore, and the time has come to go to what are going to be called cluster stations, where you will basically have to go down to the cluster station to get your mail. Now, first of all, most major apartment condos are already doing that. They don't put the mail through your door. Small towns have post offices that you go to get your mail. Hanalei over on the island of Kauai does that. It's a very charming small town. The town I grew up in New Hampshire, had the same thing. The post office was in the general store. Going down to the general store for milk, pick up the mail. So I don't know that it's really going to make that much of a change. I know that homeowners in standalone homes are going to be a little bit annoyed about it. And in the long run, I don't think it's going to really change the outcome, because as soon as the post office starts making more money, they're providers of fuel for mail trucks, or the mail trucks themselves, or other costs, consolidations, they'll just raise their prices. The cash grab is on. Everybody's out for themselves, and nobody's thinking about the system as a whole. But basically, that's the kind of measures they're thinking about to fix the economy. They're not going to deal with the reality that the Federal Reserve is a Ponzi scheme on the verge of collapse. No. We're going to go out and we're going to tinker with the post office. Have you seen how hard the government goes out to try and tinker with things, and how hard they refuse to look at the problem, which is that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest? That is what has cursed all of these nations and driven them into poverty. And all of these governments are so totally under the sway of the money junkies, they won't look at it. The elephant in the room in this case is that Federal Reserve. So we're going to go out and play with the post office, and we're going to go out and we're going to tinker with this, and we're going to do all these other things to make it look like we're doing something to fix the problem, but we're not going to fix the problem. Eurozone is a good example. Think of the Eurozone as a boat in the water with 10 holes in the bottom and 9 corks. And everything the Eurozone is doing amounts to pulling a cork out from one hole and hammering it into another hole in full view of the press cameras and saying, I'm working on the problem, but the water is still coming in and the Eurozone continues to sink. And so does the United States of America. Because when you have a banking system that by design creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, sooner or later it must crash. And that's why they're trying as hard as they can to get this world war really cranked up into rock and roll, full tilt boogie afterburner overdrive as a distraction. Because it worked the last 2 times. Crash of 1907, get out of it with World War I. Crash of 1929, get out of it with World War II. Crash of 2008, look how hard they're pushing Syria, Iran, sneering at Russia already. Sneering at China. How dare you have your own currencies? How dare you operate without the U.S. dollar? What it's all really about. We were talking about the new round of austerity cuts in Greece to keep on paying the money junkies their imaginary debt. And it's provoked riots. There are protests all over the place in Athens. Greek workers are back in the streets, screaming. They don't want this government that places the interests of the bankers above the interests of the people. Remember Greece's elections last year? They had an election, an anti-banker, anti-bailout candidate won. The pro-bankers refused to form a coalition government in order to force a second election that was marked by massive, obvious vote fraud, with ballot boxes from anti-banker districts literally being burned out in the open. Votes are gone, too bad, the banker candidates are in. Over in Bulgaria, Parliament is apparently surrounded by protesters, and the Bulgarian police have had to move in there. This push to create a global fascist economic dictatorship has literally brought the world to the edge of a global revolution. And I think any revolution at this point is going to have to be global. We have to bring all of these private central banks down at the same time, because if even one of them is allowed to survive, they'll just go right back to that same old game of capturing and trapping nation after nation, co-opting their governments, bribing them to bring them back into this private central banking scam, and it is a scam. They rule the world with nothing more than ink and paper. Rule by artificially created debt is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by chattel ownership of your person, meaning slavery. Those earlier systems worked only so long as the people were brainwashed into believing this was the way the world was supposed to be. Just as like people today are brainwashed into believing that private central banking is the way the world is supposed to be. And you are brainwashed. I remember when I was in school seeing the film strips about how the Federal Reserve was working for the nation and the people, and this was just the only way the economy could be run. And we now know that's an absolute lie. This nation was started with a completely different economy that did work for the people. The public currency is a public utility. And because our politicians are corruptible and corrupt, we have been sold back into the slavery of private central banking not once but 3 times. And every single time it has brought the nation to the edge of ruin, as we are here again today. Where, oh where, are the leaders with the courage of an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy who will stand up to these money junkies and say we need to restore the United States of America to the people of the United States, to make the nation work for them, not USA Inc. By the way, somebody just sent me this little present. If you're on Justin TV, I've been waving it at the camera. It's a little tin of mints. And on the front it has Barack Obama in that blue-red stylized image, and it's labeled Disappoint Mints. And I think that is really cute. I'm going to keep that as a souvenir. Alrighty, the Army is out there conducting nighttime exercises in downtown Chicago, practicing on how to keep the uppity American serfs in their cages. Apparently they've been using blank ammunition to rattle the windows of all the residents trying to sleep down there. It's a reminder, we're overhead, we're everywhere, don't stand up, don't riot, we're ready to crush you down. It's a fear campaign. Who is it who is working to keep the American people terrorized every single day? It's not Al-Qaeda. It's not Iran, it's not Russia, and not China. It's the U.S. government and the corporate media to keep you afraid, to keep you terrorized. So you'll go along with getting your crotch groped by the TSA. So you'll go along with the NSA listening to your sexy phone calls with your spouse and trading them around like playing cards. It's all distraction. It's all smoke and mirrors. And it must be very awkward for the government right now because every issue they try and fan up to distract from the growing scandals turns into another scandal, like this attempt to fan up Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. And we recognize it for what it is, divide and conquer, distract, change the focus. And it used to work before, but it doesn't work any longer. By the way, if you've never seen it, there's a wonderful movie called Wag the Dog. You've probably heard about it. Good time to go back and look at it along with Terry Gilliam's Brazil. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. Now, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago actually, we were talking about this school district that was offering a summer school course for high schoolers on 9/11 to basically teach them how to ignore all the blogosphere and independent media and don't listen to them, just trust the government's official story. And I raised the question at that time, how is this going to prepare these kids to go on out and get high-paying jobs? And I just got sent another article. Apparently, Duke University is now offering a college-level course on 9/11, promoting the official story. And I did a quick web search on the commercial break and found out this is now a common phenomenon all across the United States of America. Apparently, they had a course on 9/11 over at Rutgers that was taught by one of the official government investigators. They must really be afraid that the 9/11 truth movement is gaining ground as we're coming up on yet another anniversary of 9/11. And we've been talking all along about one of the problems with education in this country is that schools are no longer about education, but about indoctrination, where they're offering courses on how to believe the official story. And if you believe the official story, you'll get an A. And if you ask embarrassing questions like, how is it the BBC reported on the collapse of World Trade Center 7 27 minutes before it actually happened? Oh, man, you're going to be flunked for that. How dare you ask questions like that? Do you want the terrorists to win? And again, how are kids who are going through these courses on how to believe the government propaganda going to go out and find high-paying jobs other than working for the government propaganda bureau? Whatever happened to science, math, engineering, the kind of college education that supported the race to the moon and the subsequent technological windfall that made America a leading technological manufacturer? This idea that we're going to ask our kids to take out a student loan and go into debt so they can go into college and take a course on how to believe the government's official story about everything, and then they come out with that college degree in believing the government official story, how are they going to pay back the school loans that way? This is definitely government-mandated brainwashing posing as higher education. Now, as I understand it, these courses are all electives, and I would not be at all surprised to find people taking those courses either hoping for an easy A by saying, oh, yes, I believe, I believe, I believe. I can't imagine anybody signing on to a course like that thinking it's actually going to help them in their job search post-graduation. Little embarrassing story coming out of the Whitey Bulger case. Apparently, an FBI agent gave Whitey Bulger 40 pounds of plastic explosives to send to the IRA. Remember how I said the government likes to create the crimes and terrorism they use to scare you into obedience? This is another classic case here. More and more information surfacing about Michael Hastings being the victim of wet work, a murder. They're trying to cloud and obfuscate the case. We've had yet more computer students demonstrate how modern computerized cars that have cell phone connections, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth can be remotely taken control of to override driver input on unimportant little things like the gas pedal and the brakes. Speaking of 9/11, this is over from WFSB. The Department of Transportation officials in Connecticut are ramping up a program as we head into another anniversary of 9/11. They're mounting a program at taxpayer expense to deter, discourage, and remove any 9/11 graffiti appearing on bridges or overpasses. That tells us just how scared this government is, that the truth has gotten out to the majority of the American people about that horrible, horrible false flag to get us all angry and go hit those Arab Muslims. Apparently over in Ohio, on the State House, they're going to be building a Holocaust memorial with the Star of David. The taxpayers are paying for this. It's just always about making sure you get your daily dose of propaganda why you must feel sorry for and support Israel. But if you have any questions about 9/11, you're a kook tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy wacko that hates the state of Israel. And you should be ignored and blocked at every opportunity, despite the protections of the First Amendment. Now, Barack Obama is trying to recover some of his public approval ratings, and along with saying we're going to focus on the economy. We're going to hold meetings. See, that proves we're working on fixing the economy. No, meetings don't prove anything. And he's out there saying the Second Amendment gives citizens the right to bear arms. And it sounds really good, but he's got it wrong. The Second Amendment doesn't give you anything. The Second Amendment recognizes your pre-existing right to keep and bear arms. And we have to be very careful about politicians trying to spin it now that the Second Amendment gives you that right to bear arms, because then they can say, well, it's time to rethink the Second Amendment and take it away, which is where they're going with this. The Bill of Rights acknowledges the right, it does not grant it, and it cannot be rescinded. Now, we're seeing a lot of fury coming out of the Trayvon Martin case regarding stand-your-ground laws. And a lot of people are coming out and looking at Obama's attack on stand-your-ground as an attack on Americans' inherent automatic right to defend themselves from crimes in a nation where the police are never there to thwart a crime in progress. Now, on a practical level, if you are outside your home and you are confronted with, well, let's say a crazed neighborhood watch guy who's defying the orders of the police to leave you alone and is accosting you, you should turn around and run away. You know, best way not to be a victim is not be there. But if you are cornered, either in an alley, against a fence, in your home, you should have a right to defend your life and your property with lethal force without legal consequences. That's just common sense. But the government's attitude is, we're going to remove from the American people their right to defend themselves, and if they don't have a legal right to defend themselves, then they don't need guns. They don't need knives. They don't need pea shooters. Some of the gun grabbers are already out there saying it's time to ban swords. How many convenience stores have been held up at the point of a samurai sword? That's my next question there. The gun grabber agenda is collapsing, though. Remember Bloomberg's anti-gun group, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns? Turned out it was illegally funded with pilfered city resources. Apparently, 50 mayors have now left Mayors Against Illegal Guns. It's falling apart. This whole gun grab has backflashed horribly. Americans are buying guns and ammunition as fast as they can to preserve to themselves the right to say no to a government that's clearly out of control. Here's a little funny story. You're going to love this one. Remember back when that South Korean airplane had that horrible accident at San Francisco, which exactly matched a similar accident with an identical airplane, in which on the automated flight controls undershot the runway. And there was a TV station that fell victim to a joke where somebody gave them, these are the names of the pilots, and they were these obscene racist references. Nobody at the TV station looking at these names realized they were jokes. They claim they called the NTSB and confirmed the pilots' names. I seriously doubt that happened. Well, now this TV station, in order to get the egg off of its face, it is now issuing Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedown notices on any website that has a video of that fake Asian pilot name debacle. Now, the DMCA was supposed to protect the rights of copyright holders, but it's now being used to simply erase embarrassing news from the Internet. Not going to happen. It's already, the damage is already done. Once it's on the Internet and out there, there is no taking it back. I remember right after 9/11, when Carl Cameron had done that 4-part news story on Israeli spying, in which a U.S. government official said that, yes, there was evidence linking these arrested Israelis, the dancing Israelis, to 9/11, and it was classified by the U.S. government. Fox News was sending out notices to everybody to take the videos down, take the videos down. We don't want that out there that Israel was linked to 9/11. All apparently urged by AIPAC, which was then mired in its own spy scandal a couple of years later. But it doesn't matter. Those videos are still out there. There's no taking it back in the age of the Internet. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're coming up to the final 15 minutes of our program. As we were saying in the last segment, the availability of a public Internet, which was never intended when DARPA created the forerunner of the Internet, was called the ARPANET back then. It was never intended to be made available to the public. It was a little private system, only for government workers and military contractors and those colleges and universities that were carrying out military development research, which many of them do. Agent Orange was actually developed and tested right here at the University of Hawaii. A couple of students wound up dead from that. And then the ARPANET broke into the Internet in the 1970s. And all of a sudden, the American people and the people of the world had a mass communication system to share information with each other that was not under government and corporation control, and the governments and corporations have been screaming about it ever since. So now they're trying something new. Over in Great Britain, Prime Minister David Cameron is out there proposing a system to block child porn. It always goes back, oh, it's child porn, it's pornography. I remember in the U.S. Congress when they were debating an earlier version of the telecommunications bill, and about a month before the bill was being considered, there was a sudden eruption of porn onto what was called Usenet, which was a public news group posting system. It predated Firefox and Internet Explorer. It was a more primitive system, but it was basically people posting articles that could be read by anybody who subscribed to the news group. And there were separate, distinct sections called the alt hierarchy for people who wanted to trade adult pictures or anything else like that, a lot of interest. But all of a sudden, we started seeing some really gross, offensive porn. I mean, you know, just because it's porn is no excuse for bad photography and bad production values. I like a little art. But it was pouring into completely inappropriate groups like the cooking groups and the macrame groups. It was just flooding all over the place. And the people in those groups would chastise the posters and say, look, there's areas where you can put this stuff, and the posters would come back, I have a First Amendment right to post this in these groups. And everybody's scratching their head about what's going on. And then we started backtracking those posters and found they all came from .gov and .mil servers. And sure enough, Senator Exxon got up in the Congress with a book full of the very same pictures we had seen flooding the Internet and saying, this scourge of porn is all over. We've got to get this under control. We have to take control of the Internet before it gets, you know, and basically went on. And the Exxon Amendment basically did not pass in its original version. They watered it down. And as soon as the vote was over in Congress, that flood of porn vanished. Like a switch had been thrown. So we all understood, yeah, this was the government messing with the net, because the last thing they need is the American people talking with the American people without going through the filters of the corporate media and the government. So now Prime Minister David Cameron is over there waving child porn, the threat of child porn around, to justify a new system they want to try in Great Britain, in which, by default, websites with questionable content, meaning those not owned by giant media corporations and the government, are already blocked, and individual website owners will have to apply to have their name, their websites taken off the ban list. Basically, what they're trying to implement is government licensing of websites, so the government can control what you see, read, and hear on the Internet. They're trying to figure some way to silence that. And Cameron is saying that Google, the search engine, Bing, and Yahoo would be subject to filtering because they enable child porn. I wonder how much of the child porn out there on the Internet is actually provided at government expense in order to have the issue they can use to get us to surrender our First Amendment rights. In fact, there's a story somebody just posted at whatreallyhappened.com where apparently Stuart Rhodes, somebody was trying to plant child porn on his computer to get him arrested. And that's an old trick, too, as well. I remember a scandal up in Canada not too long ago where there was this guy that was planting child porn on somebody who belonged to this ISP and used Canada's rather severe and strict child porn laws to get the entire ISP shut down. And then the guy who'd done the planting, who owned his own ISP, quickly ran around to all those customers who were cut off from the net and say, we can get you turned on here in half an hour. And basically used this planted child porn to steal customers away from an ISP. So it's an old trick. And we know what the real target is. Websites that refuse to go along with the government story, that refuse to support the war agenda, refuse to support Israel, websites that ask those embarrassing questions like how the BBC could report on the collapse of World Trade Tower number 7 more than 20 minutes before it actually happened. And remember when the BBC was asked about that and they said, we don't know. And everybody said, well, let's go back and look at the raw video footage from that day. And the BBC said, oh, we just threw that away. You buy that one? Anybody who's worked in television news understands that raw video footage of historic events is a cash cow, because for years and years and years you will be able to license it out for documentaries and other programs. You don't just throw that stuff away. We caught them red-handed. They were running off a script. At thus and such time, Building 7 will come down, media will report it. Obviously, whoever was in charge of the plunger on Building 7 was a little delayed. And the word didn't get up to the talking heads in time. That's why we have that video from the BBC of their girl on the scene in New York talking about the collapse of Building number 7, and it's still standing behind her. They got off script, and that's why they had to throw the raw videos away. If that gets out, yeah, there's no benign explanation for why the BBC, and by the way, so did Fox News, reporting on the collapse of Building 7 before it actually happened. Because remember, prior to 9/11 and since, no steel-framed building has ever collapsed from fire. No planes hit Building 7. There were a few small office fires, but there wasn't the giant conflagration that we've seen in other steel-framed buildings that burn right down to the frame and remain standing. So it had to go away. In the official report on 9/11, they don't even mention Building 7. How it just sort of collapsed into its own footprint, looking just like a controlled demolition. And that's why they're having all these courses in high schools and colleges across America to reassure young students, oh yes, you can trust the government. The government would never lie to you. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. So critics are already pounding on David Cameron, saying that his proposal is just another attempt to try and filter and censor the Internet. We know that filters are faulty. Some of the early filters put on for child protection systems were blocking legitimate health websites that happen to deal with issues of health concern to gays and lesbians. But, oh, gay and lesbian, it's got to be blocked and it's got to be filtered. By the way, for Apple developers, at the end of last week, could not get into the developer website. Apple is now confirming that, yes, their developer site was hacked. Some data may have been stolen. We're almost here to the top of the show. They're still out there fanning the global warming hysteria over at Huffington Post. They've got an article, due to global warming, end is virtually certain for New York City, Boston, Miami, and Holland. And the reality is the world is cooling and has been for quite some time. The Antarctic sea ice area is at an all-time record high. We had a thunderstorm here Monday night in Hawaii. You know what it means when you've got a thunderstorm? There is ice in the clouds overhead because it takes a combination of ice and water banging into each other to create lightning. We're at below average temperatures here in Hawaii. This is the end of July here. All righty. Over in India, their Supreme Court has recommended a halt to all genetically modified crop field trials in their country. They want them all shut down because of the growing concern about how genetically modified crops and the damaged protein expression thereof are hazardous to human life. I hear the music. It's time for me to get out of here and accomplish something useful with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, make good choices. Be angry. Don't trust the government simply because it is the government. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We're in a period of growth, and we continue to need your help. Go over to the RBN website, hit that donate button. Maybe we can get our own TV video streamer. And aloha, America.